If there's one thing that really makes me sick, it's graduation ceremonies. You never saw so many phonies in one place sweating in cheap robes and pretending their families actually give a damn. It's depressing as hell, honestly. I'm Clara Hoffman, and I sat there staring at empty chairs because my folks were too busy faking a slip and fall accident at a grocery store to scam an insurance company. That's just the kind of lousy people they were always acting like the world owed them a living for being total screw-ups. I was finally done with their noise. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spend here with us. Here is exactly how I turned the tables on them. The air inside the university auditorium was thick with the scent of cheap cologne hairspray and the palpable anxiety of 1,000 parents hoping their tuition checks had actually purchased a future. I sat in the front row, rigid in a polyester gown that trapped the humidity of late May against my skin, staring fixedly at the two empty folding chairs to my left. They were reserved, marked with little white cards bearing the names Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman. But the velvet seats remained flipped up, gathering dust, while the rest of the room erupted in applause. My name is Clara Hoffman, and I was minutes away from graduating summa cum laude with a degree in criminology, a testament to 4 years of sleepless nights, black coffee, and a desperate need to understand the mechanics of right and wrong. My parents, however, were not stuck in traffic on the interstate, nor were they held up by a flat tire. They were absent because of a coordinated family project that took precedence over my achievement. An hour ago, my phone had vibrated against my thigh with a text from my mother. It was brief, frantic, and riddled with typos. Todd hurt, grocery store floor wet, ambulance coming, stay put. I didn't panic. I didn't rush to the exit with my robes billowing behind me. I knew exactly what that text meant because I had grown up watching the rehearsals. My older brother Todd was 32 years old, unemployed by choice, and a master of the victim narrative. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a performance. He had likely scouted a local supermarket, found an aisle with a blind spot in the camera coverage, and spilled a bottle of vegetable oil before taking a dive that would make a soccer player blush. My parents weren't rushing to the side of an injured son. They were rushing to be the witnesses the grieving chorus aimed at securing a 5-figure liability settlement to fund Todd's next year of stagnation. As the dean called my name, I walked across the stage, the wooden floorboards hollow beneath my heels. I shook the man's hand, took the diploma that felt heavy with irony, and looked out into the sea of flashing cameras. I didn't smile. In that moment, the heat of the auditorium seemed to freeze. I realized that the distance between those two empty chairs and my podium wasn't just physical. It was a moral canyon I could never bridge again. I didn't go back to the family home that summer. I didn't attend the celebration dinner that would inevitably turn into a strategy session on how to maximize the insurance claim for Todd's bad back. Instead, I took my graduation money, rented a studio apartment the size of a walk-in closet in the city, and applied to every major insurance firm in the tri-state area. I didn't want to be a police officer. I wanted to be where the money and the lies actually lived. The transition from the theoretical world of academia to the fluorescent purgatory of the claims department was jarring, but I welcomed it. I started as a junior claims adjuster for Sentinel Mutual, a behemoth of a company that insured everything from minivans to mansions. My cubicle was a gray box in a maze of gray boxes, and the work was a relentless tide of misery and mathematics. Most people burned out within 6 months, unable to handle the constant friction of people on their worst days. I thrived. To me, every claim form was a story, and every story had holes if you looked hard enough. I treated the paperwork with the same reverence a homicide detective treats a crime scene. I learned the language of deceit, the hesitation in a voice on a recorded line, the slight inflation of inventory lists, the timestamps that didn't align with the physics of a collision. While my colleagues rubber-stamped approvals to clear their queues so they could make happy hour, I was cross-referencing weather reports with alleged hail damage. I was pulling satellite imagery to verify if a roof had actually been replaced in 2019. I became a machine of verification. It wasn't about saving the company money. The corporation was faceless and indifferent. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that every dollar paid out to a liar was an insult to the honest grandmother who paid her premiums on time from a fixed income. It was a personal vendetta against the spirit of Todd that permeated the world, the idea that rules were for suckers and that the world owed you a living just for existing. By my 26th birthday, I had been promoted 3 times. I had moved from the general claims floor to the Special Investigations Unit, or SIU. This was the deep water. The SIU didn't deal with fender benders. We dealt with organized rings, arson for profit, and high-value fraud. My office changed from a cubicle to a small glass-walled room at the end of the hall. The lighting was lower, the coffee was stronger, and the files were thicker. I began to dress the part, trading the off-the-rack suits for tailored blazers and trench coats that offered armor against the world. I wore dark sunglasses not for fashion, but because eyes are the first thing to betray you, and I wanted to keep mine hidden. 5 years passed in a blur of depositions and denial letters. I built a reputation as the Ice Queen of Sentinel Mutual. Attorneys hated seeing my name on a file because they knew I didn't settle for nuisance value. If I denied a claim, it stayed denied. I had a mental map of the city that had nothing to do with streets and everything to do with risk. I knew which auto body shops inflated repair hours, which doctors signed off on whiplash without an MRI, and which contractors had a habit of finding mold that wasn't there. But beneath the professional veneer, the silence of that graduation day still echoed. I kept tabs on my family from a distance like a Cold War spy, monitoring a hostile nation. I knew Todd's slip-and-fall settlement had dried up within 18 months, spent on a lifted truck he couldn't afford gas for, and a series of investments that evaporated. I knew my parents were dipping into their retirement to keep him afloat. I never called. I never visited. The separation was absolute a quarantine to protect my own sanity. Yet in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't over. Criminality, especially the lazy, entitled kind that ran in my bloodline, is a progressive disease. It starts with a stolen candy bar, escalates to a staged fall, and eventually, when the desperation mounts and the easy money is gone, it turns destructive. I sat at my desk late one Tuesday night, the only light coming from my monitors and the street lamps 4 stories down. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the server room down the hall. I ran my thumb over the edge of a fresh case file, the paper sharp enough to cut. I had spent half a decade sharpening my mind, honing my instincts, and mastering the art of the paper trail. I was a weapon waiting for a target. I knew, with the certainty of gravity, that sooner or later, the chaos I had walked away from would try to cash a check. My family thought they were clever, that they could outsmart the system because they viewed the system as a faceless bureaucracy. They didn't realize that I was the system now. I took a sip of cold coffee, watching the rain streak against the glass, and waited for the inevitable collision. The graduation chairs had been empty, but my desk would not be. When they finally made their mistake, I would be the one waiting to catch it. The file landed on my desk on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of unrelenting downpour that turns the city skyline into a smear of gray watercolor and makes the air inside the office feel pressurized and heavy. The manila folder was thick, the edges slightly frayed, smelling of damp pulp, and the stale toner of a high-speed copier, a sensory profile I had come to associate with disaster. I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the rivulets of water racing down the glass wall of my office, when the internal courier dropped it with a dull thud that vibrated through the faux wood surface of my desk. I didn't look at it immediately. I was finishing up a denial on a bogus grand theft auto claim where the owner had clearly torched his own sedan to escape the payments. But when I finally swiveled my chair and reached for the new arrival, the name on the tab stopped my breath in my throat like a physical blow. Claimant Todd Hoffman. The letters were printed in the standard sans serif font of our intake software, impersonal and stark, yet they screamed at me with the volume of a siren. I froze my hand hovering over the cover, the muscle memory of 5 years of estrangement warring with the professional instinct to investigate. I opened the file, slowly peeling back the cover, as if I were uncovering a bomb. The claim number was fresh generated less than 48 hours ago. The incident type, residential fire. The subcategory, total loss of contents. My eyes scanned the summary of loss. my brain automatically translating the dry insurance jargon into a visual narrative. According to the report, a barbecue accident on the rear deck had spiraled out of control, the grease fire catching the vinyl siding and climbing up into the eaves, venting into the attic, and collapsing part of the living room ceiling. The structure itself was insured by a different carrier, a cut rate provider that specialized in high risk properties, but Sentinel Mutual held the rider for the personal property contents, a policy I didn't even know Todd had. As I read the narrative provided by the claimant, I could hear Todd's voice in every self-exculpatory sentence. He claimed he had stepped away for just a minute to answer a phone call, a classic minimization tactic used by negligent parties everywhere. But it wasn't the fire itself that made my stomach turn. Accidents happen even to idiots. It was the itemized inventory list attached to the back of the file. This was the heart of the fraud, the audacious, staggering lie that turned a mistake into a felony. Todd, a man who I knew had struggled to hold down a job at a car wash and lived in a perpetual state of financial adolescence, was claiming a home theater system valued at $10,000. He listed an 85-inch OLED television, a specific flagship model that had only hit the market 6 months ago. He claimed a collection of rare vintage guitars, specifically a 1960s Fender Stratocaster and a Gibson Les Paul Custom, totaling $40,000. He listed designer leather sectionals, imported rugs, and high-end gaming computers. The total claim for personal property was pushing $150,000. I felt a cold, hard laugh bubbling up in my chest, devoid of any humor. The Todd I knew listened to music on a cracked smartphone and sat on a futon he'd found on a curb. This wasn't just inflation. It was pure fiction. I flipped deeper into the file looking for the corroboration. That's when the ground truly fell out from under me. Attached to the inventory list were 2 sworn affidavits signed and notarized. I, breathless and shaking, recognized the handwriting immediately. The loops on the Y's, the sharp, jagged crossing of the T's, my parents. They had signed legal documents swearing under penalty of perjury that they had been in the home 3 days prior to the fire and had personally witnessed these items. They stated they had watched a movie on that 85-inch screen. They claimed to have seen the guitars displayed on the wall. They were backing him up. They were co-conspirators. My mother and father, who had once scolded me for taking an extra cookie without asking, were now risking prison time to help their golden boy defraud a Fortune 500 company. I stared at their signatures, feeling the final tether of familial obligation snap. This was no longer a family matter. This was a crime scene. I looked at the routing slip stapled to the front, and the file hadn't come to me by chance. It had been flagged by the SIU algorithm, a piece of code designed to catch statistical anomalies and cross-reference employee data. The system had spotted the shared surname and the historical address data linking me to the claimants. It was tagged Code 44, High-Risk Familial Anomaly, Conflict Check Required. The standard protocol was simple. I was supposed to flag this recuse myself immediately to avoid any appearance of bias and hand the file over to an investigator in the next county. A different agent would treat it like any other file. Maybe they'd be thorough. Maybe they'd be lazy. Maybe they'd offer a settlement just to close the books on a complex burn job. I sat there in the dim light of my office, the rain hammering against the glass like a drum roll. If I passed this on, Todd might get away with it. He might get a check for $50,000 just to make him go away. He would learn that lying pays. He would learn that the world is soft. I couldn't let that happen. I picked up my pen, a heavy metal barrel that felt like a gavel in my hand. I wasn't just an employee of Sentinel Mutual. I was the only person on earth who knew the absolute truth of who these people were. I knew the poverty of their character better than any background check could reveal. I navigated to the digital file on my screen, bypassed the recusal button, and clicked Accept Assignment. I typed in my override code formally, taking ownership of the investigation. The screen flashed, Green Case Assigned Agent C. Hoffman. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to cut. I wasn't going to just deny this claim. I was going to dismantle it. I opened a fresh notebook and began to plot the dissection. I needed to prove a negative that the items never existed. It's the hardest thing to do in forensics. You can prove a fire happened, you can prove arson, but proving a TV wasn't there requires a specific kind of science. I started listing my requirements. I needed the original 911 call audio to establish timelines. I needed the fire marshal's preliminary report, specifically the vector analysis of the burn pattern. I needed the debris removal halted immediately. I reached for my phone and dialed the restoration company listed on the intake form. "This is Clara Hoffman from Sentinel Mutual, SIU," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the tremor I felt inside. "I am placing a hard hold on the debris removal for the Hoffman claim. Nothing moves, not a splinter. I'll be there in the morning." I hung up and looked at the list of items again. An 85-inch TV. The sheer stupidity of it was almost insulting. A TV that size contains a massive amount of glass plastic and distinct rare earth metals. It doesn't just vanish. It leaves a corpse. I spent the next 4 hours building a matrix of the claim, cross-referencing the dimensions of the room with the items listed. According to Todd's list, the living room was furnished like a billionaire's penthouse. Yet the tax records showed a 900-square-foot bungalow built in 1978. The math didn't work, the physics wouldn't work, and I was going to make sure the law worked exactly as intended. I printed the affidavits and pinned them to my corkboard, the signatures of my parents staring back at me. They had chosen their side. They had chosen the lie. Now they would have to face the truth, and she was coming for them in a trench coat and a rental car. The rain intensified outside, blurring the city lights into streaks of red and gold, but inside my office, everything was crystal clear. The investigation had begun. 3 days later, I pulled my rental sedan onto the gravel shoulder of the street where I used to ride my bicycle. The neighborhood had aged, the oak trees thicker, and the pavement more cracked. But the house at number 402 was unrecognizable. It stood like a blackened, hollowed-out tooth in the middle of a healthy smile. The fire had been ferocious, gutting the central structure and leaving only the charred framing studs standing like ribs against the gray morning sky. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots, and was immediately hit by the smell. It is a specific cloying scent that sticks to your clothes and hair. For days, wet charcoal-melted plastic and the sour dampness of thousands of gallons of water soaking into old insulation. It is the smell of ruin. I adjusted my trench coat, checking that my ID badge was clipped visibly to my lapel, and put on my dark sunglasses. I wasn't here as a sister. I was here as the Grim Reaper of insurance claims. Standing near the wreckage of the garage was a man pacing in tight, anxious circles. Todd. He looked older than 32, his face puffy and unshaven, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that looked too clean for someone who had supposedly lost everything. He was performing the role of the devastated homeowner for an audience of none, kicking at stones and running his hands through his hair. He didn't look up as I approached, assuming I was just another adjuster come to cut a check. "About time you guys showed up," he muttered, his voice thick with feigned exhaustion. "I've been calling the office every hour. We need to get a hotel voucher approved, and the advance on the contents." He turned, then the rehearsed speech dying in his throat as he actually looked at me. The recognition hit him like a physical slap. His eyes widened, shifting from confusion to shock, and then to a flicker of primal fear. "Clara," he whispered the name sounding foreign in his mouth. What are you doing here?" I didn't stop walking. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a hug or a condolence. I walked right past him, stopping only to flash the SIU badge that caught the dull light. "Agent Hoffman, Sentinel Mutual Special Investigations." I said, my voice flat and professional. "I'm the lead investigator on this claim. Step back from the structure, sir. This is an active investigation scene." I left him standing there, mouth agape, and crossed the yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze. The burn zone was a chaotic mess of black sludge and carbonized wood, but to me, it was a map. I stepped carefully through the remains of the back deck, the origin point, and into what used to be the living room. I pulled my laser distance measurer from my pocket and began to work. Fire is chaotic, violent, and unpredictable, but it obeys the laws of physics. It consumes fuel at a specific rate, it melts metals at specific temperatures, and most importantly, it leaves a shadow of everything it touches. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by debris that came up to my shins. I was looking for the ghosts of the items Todd had listed. An 85-inch OLED television is a massive object. It contains pounds of glass copper wiring, steel framing, and rare earth metals. When a TV that size burns, the plastic casing melts away, but the screen itself, the glass, slumps into a distinct puddle. The steel frame warps but remains intact. The copper fuses into slag. It doesn't just evaporate. I scanned the area where the entertainment center was supposedly located. There was nothing but wood ash. I kicked through the debris with a steel-toed boot looking for the telltale glint of molten glass or the twisted skeleton of a chassis. Nothing. I moved to the wall where the vintage guitars were allegedly hung. A 1960s Stratocaster has a solid wood body, yes, but it also has a steel truss rod running through the neck, steel tuning pegs, and a heavy metal bridge. Wood burns. Steel endures. There were no truss rods in the ash. There were no bridge plates. There was absolutely no physical evidence that any of the high-value items listed on the spreadsheet had ever been in this room. "You won't find 'em," a voice rumbled from the shadows of the hallway. I turned to see a man standing in the doorway of what used to be the kitchen. He was older, maybe late 60s, wearing the heavy turnout gear of the fire department, though he had stripped off the jacket to reveal suspenders over a gray t-shirt. His helmet was tucked under his arm, revealing a face etched with the deep lines of a man who had spent 40 years squinting into infernos. Fire Marshal Henderson. I recognized him from the case file notes. He was looking at me with a sharp, appraising gaze, his eyes narrowing as he took in my suit, my boots, and the way I was gridding the room. "Agent Hoffman?" he asked, stepping over a fallen beam with the grace of a mountain goat. "I'm Marshal Henderson. I saw you poking around the entertainment wall. You know your business." I nodded, extending a gloved hand. "I know that an 85-inch TV doesn't turn into invisible gas." "Marshal," I said. "And I know that a Gibson Les Paul leaves a truss rod behind." Henderson let out a short, dry chuckle that sounded like sandpaper on wood. "Damn right it does," he said. "I've seen houses burned down to the foundation, and I can still find the toaster oven. This room," he gestured around with a calloused hand. "It burned hot, sure, but not that hot. This wasn't a blast furnace." He motioned for me to follow him out the back, away from where Todd was still pacing by the road, trying to make a phone call, likely to our parents. We walked to the back of Henderson's red pickup truck, the tailgate serving as his mobile office. He popped the latch on a metal clipboard and pulled out a stack of documents. "I don't like liars. Agent Hoffman," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming gravelly and serious. "And I don't like people using my guy's danger for a payday. We risked 3 men on the roof cutting a vent hole for this fire. One of them slipped and nearly went into the attic. If they did that for a fraud..." He trailed off, the threat hanging in the air like smoke. He handed me a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was a partially burned receipt preserved in a way only a miracle or sloppy criminal could manage. "Found this in the trash can by the garage. Bought 2 bags of the cheapest lighter fluid and a bag of discount charcoal 3 hours before the fire. He claimed it was a gas grill accident, but there's no propane tank on the property." I took the bag, my heart hammering a steady rhythm of victory. "But here's the nail in the coffin," Henderson said, pulling a tablet from his truck. He swiped through a gallery of images. We were first on scene. 4 minutes response time. The fire was rolling on the back deck, venting through the eaves, but the living room window, it hadn't blown out yet. He turned the tablet toward me. The photo was high resolution, taken by the dashboard camera of the lead engine. It showed the front of the house illuminated by the strobing emergency lights. The living room window was clear. Through the glass, you could see the interior of the room lit by the glow of the fire behind it. It was completely empty. No 85-inch TV, no leather sectional, no guitars on the wall, just bare floorboards and a couple of cheap folding chairs. He moved it all out, Henderson said, spitting on the ground. Or he never had it. Either way, that room was empty when the fire started. I looked at the photo, the definitive proof that would sink my brother and my parents. It was beautiful. Can I get a copy of this immediately? I asked. Henderson nodded. Already sent it to your server, along with my official cause, an origin report stating the fire was caused by negligent misuse of accelerants. We shook hands, a pact between two people who understood that, while fire cleanses, it also reveals. I walked back toward my car, the evidence locked in my mind, ready to draft the document that would end the Hoffman family charade. Todd saw me coming and started to walk toward me, a desperate hope in his eyes. I just got in the car and locked the door. The trap was set. The execution of a denial is not a bludgeoning. It is a surgical procedure requiring a steady hand and a heart that has been cooled to absolute zero. I returned to the office the following morning, the smell of smoke still faintly clinging to my hair, and shut the door to my glass-walled sanctuary. The city outside was waking up a hum of traffic and commerce, but inside my office, the atmosphere was hermetically sealed. I sat down at my desk, placed Fire Marshal Henderson's flash drive in the center of the blotter, like a religious artifact, and opened a blank document on my screen. This was the moment I had trained for. Most people assume that insurance fraud is fought in courtrooms with shouting lawyers, but the real battles are won here, in the quiet, rhythmic tapping of a keyboard, drafting a letter that dismantles a person's reality line by line. I didn't want to just reject the claim. A flat denial would give Todd's attorney, if he could find one willing to work on contingency, a foothold to argue bad faith. They could claim I was biased, that I hadn't investigated thoroughly, that I was denying coverage based on a whim. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to pay the claim. I had to validate the event. I had to trap them in their own narrative so tightly that any move they made would only tighten the noose. I began typing, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Reclaim, number 892A44. Insured Todd Hoffman. Date of loss, June 14th. I started with the acceptance of liability. This was the bait. I wrote that Sentinel Mutual accepted the findings of the fire marshal's office, confirming that a fire had indeed occurred at the insured premises due to the negligent operation of a charcoal grill. By admitting the fire was real, I removed their ability to sue for breach of contract regarding the structure itself. I detailed the damage to the vinyl siding, calculating the square footage with agonizing precision. I referenced the receipts found in the trash, acknowledging the purchase of the igniter fluid and the briquettes. I was validating their stupidity, legally binding them to the story that Todd had been careless. It was a strategic concession, a way of saying, we believe you are an idiot. But then came the pivot, the paragraph where the tone shifted from administrative to forensic. Regarding the personal property claim for contents totally $148,000. This was where I wielded the science I had gathered in the ashes. I moved through the inventory list with the cold efficiency of an autopsy. First, the 85-inch television. I referenced the specific chemical composition of the OLED panel, citing the melting points of the rare earth metals, and the tempered glass screen. I pasted the spectral analysis of the ash samples taken from the living room floor, highlighting the complete absence of copper silicon and the distinct polymers found in high-end electronics. Forensic analysis of the debris field indicates 0 parts per million of the requisite materials associated with the claimed item, I wrote. I didn't say he lied. I said the physics didn't support his reality. Then I moved to the guitars. I attached a diagram of a Gibson Les Paul circling the steel truss rod, the tuning pegs, and the bridge assembly components that survive residential fires. I contrasted this with photos of the burn zone, which showed nothing but wood ash and nails from the framing. The absence of ferrous metal residues in the specific quadrant indicated by the insured suggests the item was not present at the time of ignition. Then came the kill shot. I uploaded the photo from the fire department's dashboard camera, the one Henderson had given me. It was a haunting, beautiful image, the fire raging in the back, the red lights washing over the house and the front window perfectly clear, revealing a living room that was starkly, undeniably empty. I cropped the image, zoomed in, and adjusted the contrast to highlight the bare floorboards where the $10,000 leather sectional was supposed to be. I referenced the affidavits signed by my parents, Samuel and Martha Hoffman, in which they swore to seeing these items days prior. I didn't call them liars in the text. I didn't have to. I simply juxtaposed their sworn statements against the undeniable photographic evidence of an empty room. The photographic evidence collected by first responders at 18:04 hours contradicts the sworn affidavits provided regarding the occupancy and furnishing of the dwelling. The implication was clear. This wasn't just a mistake. It was perjury. It was a conspiracy. By attaching their statements to the denial of the specific items, I was legally binding them to the fraud. Now came the math. I couldn't deny the entire claim because the siding did melt and the grill was destroyed. To deny the valid parts would be acting in bad faith. So I calculated the actual cash value ACV of the damaged property. I took the market value of a generic charcoal grill, $40. I applied depreciation for age and wear and tear, reducing it to $12. I calculated the cost to patch 4 square feet of vinyl siding, $488. I summed it up. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page as I typed the final figure. Total settlement amount, $500. It was a masterstroke of malicious compliance. I wasn't refusing to pay. I was paying exactly what was owed based on the physical evidence. I printed the letter on heavy watermarked bond paper. I signed it with my full name and title, Clara Hoffman, Senior Investigator, SIU. Then I cut the check, a bright blue Sentinel Mutual check for $500.00. I placed the check and the 5-page report into a thick envelope. I didn't send it regular mail. I walked down to the mailroom myself, bypassing the outgoing bin. I filled out the certified mail slip, the green card that requires a signature upon delivery. I wanted proof. I wanted the moment Todd scribbled his name to be recorded in a federal database acknowledging that he had received his judgment. As the machine stamped the postage ka-chunk, I felt a wave of tension leave my shoulders, replaced by a cold, vibrating silence. It was done. I went back to my office and sat in my ergonomic chair, turning it to face the window. The rain had stopped leaving, the city washed clean and glistening. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine the scene that would play out in 2 days. The mail carrier walking up the driveway, Todd signing for the letter, his hands shaking with anticipation, thinking it was the 6-figure windfall that would fix his life. The tearing of the envelope, the confusion as he pulled out a check for $500, the slow, creeping horror as he read the report and realized that the sister he had ignored for 5 years hadn't just denied him, she had dissected him. She had used his own greed to paint a target on his back and his parents' backs. The silence in my office felt heavy, not with guilt, but with the satisfying weight of gravity. The world makes sense when equations balance, and I had just balanced the ledger. The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The check was in the mail, and it was going to burn hotter than the fire ever did. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was an explosion, immediate and catastrophic, exactly as I had calculated. The silence of my office was shattered 48 hours after I mailed the check, broken by the shrill, persistent ringing of my desk phone. The caller ID displayed a local number I didn't recognize, but I knew who was on the other end. It was a lawyer, a strip mall ambulance chaser Todd had likely found on a billboard, calling to bluster and threaten. He started with high-volume aggression, accusing Sentinel Mutual of bad faith practices and malicious denial of benefits. He threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress, claiming his client was a victim of a corporate vendetta. I let him scream. I let him expend all that oxygen and righteous indignation until there was a pause for breath. Then calmly I spoke 3 sentences. Counselor, have you reviewed the dashboard camera footage from the first responders? Have you cross-referenced your client's inventory list with the forensic ash analysis? And are you aware that your client's parents signed affidavits under penalty of perjury for items that demonstrably did not exist? The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I could hear the lawyer shuffling papers, the realization dawning on him that he hadn't been told the whole truth by his client. He hung up without saying goodbye, but the damage was done. By threatening legal action, Todd had forced my hand, or rather, allowed me to release the mechanism I had primed. Because the claim involved sworn affidavits verified as false by forensic evidence, I was legally obligated to report it to the National Insurance Crime Bureau, NICB. The submission of the full SIU report to the NICB was the true death blow. This wasn't just an internal company memo. It was a federal flag that went into a shared database accessible by every insurance carrier bank and lender in the country. The consequences cascaded through the Hoffman family with the speed of a falling guillotine. Todd was immediately blacklisted. His credit score, already fragile, imploded as the fraud marker hit his report. He would never be able to secure a loan, rent a decent apartment, or even get a cell phone plan without a massive deposit. But the real devastation landed on my parents. Samuel and Martha Hoffman, who had spent 40 years building a facade of suburban respectability, were named as active accomplices in an attempted insurance fraud scheme. Within a week, they received notices from their own insurance carriers, home, auto, and life. Canceled. All of it. They were deemed moral hazards. In the insurance world, once you are dropped for fraud, you are exiled to the surplus lines market, the murky, unregulated waters where high-risk policies cost 10 times the standard rate for a fraction of the coverage. Their premiums skyrocketed from $2,000 a year to $20,000. They were forced to drain their retirement savings just to keep their home insured, a legal requirement of their mortgage. The financial security they had hoarded, the nest egg they intended to protect by helping Todd scam the system, was vaporized by their own signature. The emotional climax arrived on a Friday evening just as I was taping up the last box in my office. My cell phone buzzed. "Mom." I stared at the screen, watching the letters glow, debating whether to answer. I let it go to voicemail. I wanted a record. I wanted to hear the raw, unfiltered truth of who she was. The notification popped up a minute later. I pressed play, holding the phone away from my ear as if it were radioactive. Her voice was unrecognizable, cracked, hysterical, vibrating with a mix of rage and self-pity. "Clara, are you there? We just got the letter from the bank. They're calling the loan. Do you have any idea what you've done? We're your family. We did this for Todd because he needed help. And you destroyed us. Over a TV, over some stupid rules. You're cold, Clara. You've always been cold. I hope you're happy. Don't ever come back here. You hear me? You're dead to us." I listened to the message twice. I didn't feel the sting of rejection. I felt the relief of validation. She didn't deny the crime. She didn't apologize for the lie. She was only angry that the consequences had actually arrived. She confirmed everything I suspected on that graduation day. To them, love was complicity, and integrity was betrayal. I didn't delete the message. I saved it to the cloud, a permanent digital artifact to remind me why I could never go back. It was my closure. I finished packing my desk in silence. The gray walls of the cubicle farm no longer held me. My work on the Hoffman file had drawn the attention of the executive leadership in Chicago. They saw a woman who could prioritize the integrity of the firm over the tug-of-blood relations, a ruthlessness they valued highly. I had been offered a position as a regional director for the SIU in the Pacific Northwest, a promotion that came with a significant raise and a relocation package. I was leaving the humidity and the history of the East Coast for the clean air and mountains of Washington State. I stripped my nameplate off the door, dropping it into the trash can. Agent Clara Hoffman of this specific office didn't exist anymore. I was evolving. I walked out to the parking lot, the asphalt radiating the heat of the summer day, and loaded the single box of personal effects into the trunk of my car. I had one last stop to make before I hit the interstate. The fire station was quiet when I pulled in, the large bay doors open to catch the breeze. Fire Marshal Henderson was sitting on a bench near the entrance, polishing a pair of boots with methodical, rhythmic strokes. He looked up as I approached, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't stand up, but he stopped polishing. "Heard about the Hoffman case," he said, his voice low. "An ICB flagged him. That's a hard road for folks their age." He wasn't judging me. He was just stating the facts of the wreckage. I stood there leaning against the brick wall, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun. They struck the match, Marshal, I said softly. I just made sure they didn't walk away from the fire. Henderson nodded slowly, a gesture of deep, weary understanding. He stood up then, wiping his hands on a rag, and extended a rough, calloused hand toward me. You're a good investigator, Clara, he said. You see the things other people blink away. Don't lose that. But don't let the smoke swallow you up either. I shook his hand, feeling the strength and the honesty in his grip. He was the only person in this entire zip code who understood the language of ash and truth. I'm heading west, I told him. New territory. He smiled, a genuine expression that broke the grim lines of his face. Good. Let it rain. I drove out of the city as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I merged onto the highway, watching the skyline shrink in my rearview mirror. The hospital where I was born, the university where I graduated alone, the house where my parents were currently screaming at each other over mounting bills. It all grew smaller, turning into a two-dimensional backdrop I could finally roll up and put away. I turned on the radio, finding a station playing old jazz, the saxophone, mournful but driving. I thought about Todd waiting for a check that would never clear. I thought about my mother clinging to her victimhood like a life raft. And then I thought about the road ahead, a ribbon of asphalt stretching out into the darkness, leading to a place where I was defined only by my actions, not my name. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through the car, carrying away the scent of stagnant air and old secrets. The Hoffman file was closed. The verdict was rendered. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, driving toward a future that was clean cold and entirely my own. Sometimes the only way to find true peace is to let the bridges you burn light the way to a better future. If you enjoyed Clara's methodical takedown of her family's greed, please hit that subscribe button for more stories of justice. Tell us below if you think the punishment fit the crime. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.